Yes, go ahead, sir.
Well, I'm not an economist, I'm a cardiologist, so it will be entirely a different question. Now, I heard the panel discussing all about economics and other things, but while I was driving just now, I had a BBC announcement stating that there are 300 million Africans who do not have access to fresh drinking water, and substantial number, much more than that, do not have free or rather clean toilet facilities. I hear that Mr. Modi has embarked upon a policy of clean drinking water in various states and at the same time toilet facilities in various villages in other parts of India. This is equally important as the road construction and other policies which will enhance the economic situation of India, particularly in improving investment as well as tourism in Singapore, in India. Oh, I'm a Singaporean, so it comes Singapore first. Thank you very much.
Ashok, do you want to take that on and just quickly tell the audience how much it's to do with Mr. Modi's stress on clean drinking water and providing toilet facilities? No, but I thought maybe we just want to elaborate, tell the audience about how much he's done in that particular field. No? You want to? Never miss a chance.
Just very briefly, the lack of toilet facilities in India is larger than sub-Saharan Africa, and if you will, 50% open defecation is there in India at the time Modi came to power in 2014. Now, here again, the delta is very important. No other prime minister or political leader had even made this an issue. And he has made it an issue. I do not know how much progress has been made, but at least somebody has made this an issue. One last point on the, well, anyway.
Let me agree that it's important that it's an issue. But just two things. Number one, building toilets alone is not a panacea. Because part of the problem is that people don't use them even when they're built. There's a survey in Uttar Pradesh that something like 80% of the toilets built in the last 7 years are never used. And this is a problem. There is a cultural preference for going in the open and so on. Second problem is running water, lack thereof, and maintenance of these toilets. So those toilets that are used rapidly become unusable. Accumulation of fecal matter and human waste actually contaminates groundwater far more than open defecation can do. So it's a very complicated, large-scale issue. It requires a major challenge. I agree with Surjit. It's remarkable that a Prime Minister has brought this up to the top of the national agenda. It's helping change attitudes in various places, but we are barely scratching the surface of a very, very vast problem.
I see that this scatological subject is what every member of the panel found. Everyone wants to have a word on it. Go ahead, Ashok.
You know, we've spoken about sanitation, we've spoken about toilets, we've spoken about open defecation. Pratap spoke about health and education. Frankly, you can debate what the Modi government's done, should do, has not done for decades on end. But the fact is, much of the mandate for all of these issues lies with state governments. And unless state governments start performing and state government capacity comes up on their own, I mean, no one can impose it top down, nothing will change. The issue you raised, sir, is a very, very important issue. Mr. Modi can talk about it on 15th August from the Red Fort or wherever. He can be an evangelist for cleanliness. But it is a long-term process, and it is frankly a state government-driven process. There is a limit to what any central government, whether BJP...
No, but central government can't provide funding, and what's been dismaying is this government's failure to do that.
Pratap.
I think we need to debate about how social sector funding is...
Can I use this to make one general point? Because I think this debate has actually hit upon, to my mind, what is actually the crucial issue. If you look at India's governance record, we are actually quite good at doing things in mission mode, things which have a finite target and a finite delivery time. We conduct elections very well, right? Our auditors audit very well, right?
Kumbh Melas.
Sorry, Kumbh Melas, right? What we are not very good at, right, is regular iterative processes that involve large numbers of transactions with millions of people over long periods of time, right? And the challenge for Swachh Bharat, right, which is we will meet the toilet construction target, right, as a one-off, clearly identifiable outcome. The toilets will be built, you know, more or less. What has not been transformed in that governance process, right, is precisely that move from this mission mode driven intervention to the creation of regular processes, right, that can actually deliver those outcomes on a routine basis. And in that sense, Swachh Bharat and the sanitation program will be a good test of whether we can actually make that transition.
You know, do you remember that phrase, you can lead a horse to water? This conversation reminds me of another one. You can build a man a toilet. But he's not going to use it.
I promise you I'll use it. If you allow me to speak, that's about all. See, it's not a question of building it, not building it. It's a question of sensitizing public opinion about an issue which we were pushing into the background in the past.
This has been done.
Which has been done very effectively, and to that extent, to stand up on the ramparts of the Red Fort on your first address to the nation and talk about toilets, I think requires a great deal of courage to do that. Because, and that's the consciousness which has been created. We may do it in mission mode, we may build a toilet, use it as a storeroom and not use it as a toilet, because it's a habit, it's a culture. But the very fact that the thought has been ignited needs to, I mean, look at the other thing. Voluntary surrender of LPG connections is appealing to you. So I think it's a consciousness which has been commenced.
I think we had a lady over there. Did I see a lady's hand go up over there? No? Or a gentleman over there? Yes, sir. At the back, at the back. The gentleman over there right at the back of the corner. No? Over there.
Hello, my name is Mark Paul. I'm visiting from India, New Delhi, but I hail from Tamil Nadu. I want to address the issue of your comments on the issue of intolerance. And particularly this thing about Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Karan, you said that 75% of the population would agree to say that. What about people south of the Vindhyas? Or take just Tamil Nadu. They don't know what it means. Just as most don't know what the national anthem means. And in these last 2 years, Dr. Surjit Bhalla, you said Delta. We are a very tolerant country, but definitely tending towards fascism. And there, I would like your comments on the Delta.
I completely agree with you, because if you recall when I asked that question, I said I was going to ask a devil's advocate question. I wasn't actually putting forward my own personal views. My position, since you have asked me, and I'll happily answer it for you, is that every single Indian has the right to refuse to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai, and that it is not constitutionally required of you to say so. And the Indian Supreme Court would uphold the right to refuse it. That is my personal position. But the question was asked as a devil's advocate question.
Thanks for that. I might have inadvertently said Bharat Mata Ki Jai earlier, but now specifically definitely not. Henceforth, definitely not.
And I hope that that is a position that Indian politicians across the board would respect, because you have a right not to say what you don't want to say.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Good evening, delegates. My name is Arnab Sharma. I'm an MBA marketing student from SPDS School of Global Management. So my question to you, it's an open question, anyone can take it. So there was a study by IIM Ahmedabad. It's an economic question. They had done a research about wanting to lay railway bullet trains from Ahmedabad to Bombay, where at the same time you also have the problem of droughts, famines, and shortage of water in states like Maharashtra, Orissa, and a bunch of other states. So if you were to juxtapose the investment, does India really need bullet trains at this point in time if you were to use the same investment for setting up desalination plants to cater to the shortages of water supply?
It's a brilliant question, but it's a moral question, not an economic question. And I'm wondering why should put it to Pratap.
Just one factual thing, I mean, as I understand it, and Ashok and Surjit may correct, is I think the bullet train issue has been hyped out. Frankly, this is basically incremental investment that would not happen otherwise. The terms on which the Japanese are actually giving the money, I mean, this, if you like, this is Japanese external Keynesian stimulus for their economy. I don't think it has any bearing on, as it were, the question of, diverting investment into drought relief.
I'm going to put it to you, but let me add a twist to the question. Don't talk about it in terms of bullet trains. Put it in terms of should India, with all its poverty, health and education problems, be sending potentially a man to Mars? Right? Should we have a space program? Put it in those terms.
Please understand, the space program also has helped us with clear developmental challenges. One. Second, you are asking a developing country to stop doing lots of things and still it solves all its poverty problems. You are not placing the same conditions on an America which also has poverty or Europe. Second, please understand these regimes will close. By the time you solve your poverty problem, you will find that the countries in the world have put together an NPT analog for space as well and said you can't get it. So you have to get it when you can.
Surjit?
Look, one, I completely agree with what Pratap said, but further, let's make the debate what happened in India, in Delhi, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and whether we should construct the metro. There is no metro constructed anywhere in the world which has, if you will, passed the benefit cost test at the time of construction. Yet, you go and ask New York, you go and ask Paris, you go and ask Delhi, whether would you not have a metro, and you would now find everybody saying, yes, we want a metro. But we still have hunger, we still have poverty, and we still have defecation problems. So, listen, the complete non sequitur, they're not related. Let's talk on each issue.
We have two ladies.
Okay, just one thing. As far as trains are concerned, though, it'd be nice if the government got basic train service for the armed army fixed first before they built bullet trains. I mean, a lot of our trains.
We didn't get bus service. We didn't get bus service fixed, but we got the metro done. So that's also a norm.
But does everything have to become a contention between the two of you? Yes, the lady in the green. But remember, the interest that the Japanese are charging is minimal.
It'll never break even, actually.
My name is Ashwini Devri, I'm a writer. When Mr. Modi came to power, there was a lot of hype and fanfare about the Ganga cleaning project. I guess my question is, where is it at now, and has any progress been made on that? Because for the first time we felt, oh, India's finally paying attention to an environmental issue, and the subject of climate change was on the radar.
Take that. Very good question. The Namami Ganga project actually builds on the NMCG project with the National Mission to Clean Ganga, which the UPA government formulated with the help of the World Bank. The Modi government has actually expanded on that. It's not seeing the development of the Ganga basin as just a cleanup. It's also seeing it as using the Ganga as a waterway and to actually move a lot of cargo on the Ganga, which was what the Ganga's original purpose was. It was sort of the expressway of history. And waterways are used in China and Europe. They're just not used in India. This process is, we had a new waterways bill in India last year, which got passed, actually. I think it got passed by Parliament. But do remember, Indians have a very false notion of what a cleanup of the Ganga is going to be. It's because of sedimentation, because of the nature of the ecology of India and the Himalayas, you're never going to have a river as clean as a European river, where you can see the coin at the bottom of the river. Second, this process, the Danube or the Rhine, took 20 years to clean up. With technology, we can do it in maybe 10 or 15 years. But to expect it to be done in 2 or 3 years, or even 5 years, is an ask.
Yes, the lady in the red. Go ahead, and I'll come there after that too.
I have a question for Mr. Rai, maybe unrelated to the panel discussion today, but what are your views on reservation in the education sector in India? Because we keep talking about nothing is being, but there has been a generation to the affirmative action. And when we write a cap in the constitution, is this going to stay always, because in the long run, it's going to have an extremely detrimental effect to the human capital that we put out.
Actually, this should have been addressed to the lawmaker who's sitting in the middle. But well, if you ask me for my take, see, reservations were introduced for a very temporary phase in the country. They have extended. Probably there's been a requirement to extend them. But I think on reservations also, the very thing that has been done on the LPG connections, and that has been brought out by a young member of parliament, he has said that any family which has benefited from reservation once should voluntarily give up that benefit so that a larger proportion of his own community must benefit.
You know, the Americans have a wonderful phrase, fat chance. The Americans have a wonderful phrase, fat chance.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, well, it is a call for affirmative action made from that very community itself. That's why I think it has a better chance, because if it picks up, it gathers momentum, the benefit of reservation will go out of the virtuous circle within which it has been captured today to a larger number of people, and I think society will benefit. And as you said, there will be merit among the people that it throws in.
What many in the audience do not know is that Pratap Bhanu Mehta was, I believe, the original vice chairman of the Knowledge Commission set up by Dr. Manmohan Singh. He served on that body for a couple of years before he got disillusioned with them. I think that question about the utility of reservations in the education sector and whether it serves a purpose or whether it actually holds back merit is one that should be put to Pratap. Boy, Pratap, I think you should answer that.
I think it's a very long and complicated subject. So one, we should stipulate that a society like India will require affirmative action of a very serious kind for a very long time. Let's have no illusion about it. And second, I think we need to get out of this binary that this very construction that affirmative action intrinsically is against merit. I think this is just pure nonsense, frankly. Ideally, it's a way of actually identifying more people who should be brought into the merit pool. Having said that, I think there are two very important things to focus on, because this is actually going to be a very big political storm in the next 3 to 5 years. So at the time of independence, there was consensus on the Dalits, right? That no matter whichever way you cut it, which is who should be the beneficiaries, what's the objective, what's the instrument you use, that's one community that in a sense kind of qualifies. I think the politics begins when it was extended to OBCs, when actually what I wrote in a column, which is reservations has actually become a new form of majoritarianism. In fact, one of these big political puzzles where Dalits and OBCs whose actual material interests actually are more in conflict, in fact Brahmins have become more or less irrelevant to that system in some ways, right? On this actually ally, because there is a sense that actually the power of numbers will keep the system the way, in a sense, it is. Every single state in the next 2 to 3 years is going to see a major political agitation in reservation. You saw Patidars, you saw Jats, the Rajputs are getting up, right? And I think there will have to be a national conversation about a new framework for affirmative action. Particularly, I think the Dalit question I want to kind of leave aside. A new framework, right? Which can actually, in a sense, address the challenge. But this is a political tinderbox. Also, I help by the fact, and one of the things, whatever the unemployment data may say, Surjit's unemployment data, the fact is good formal sector, private sector jobs are very scarce. And so the pressure on government jobs and then being access of demands for reservation is going to only intensify, not abate.
Actually, let me just add one thing to what Pratap just said. The debate, in a sense, has started because last summer, a surprisingly unnoticed Supreme Court judgment, which struck down the UPA government's initial reservations for Jats and Haryana, subsequently pursued by the BJP government, the NDA government. The Supreme Court struck it down and unambiguously has written in its judgment that caste alone can no longer be a basis for reservations, and that the government has to come back before recommending any other further community for reservations, come back with a different framework that takes into account all indices of deprivation, including social and economic. Now, after that judgment, so far nothing has gone to the Supreme Court. But if tomorrow some other state gives reservation to some other community and somebody challenges it all the way to the court, the judgment that stands means it's going to be invalidated. And eventually you're going to have to end up with a very serious debate about what exactly...
Can I ask you a question? And this will be the nub of the argument. The big political demand that's going to rise after the release of the social economic census is to pass a constitutional amendment to overturn the 50% limit. Where will the Congress party stand if that demand is raised?
I have no idea. The Congress party will discuss it. But I think we can't just make policy on a whim as like Mr. Modi flying to Lahore. I mean, you have to think about it.
Shashi, you mustn't edit yourself. The Congress party will discuss it. Sonia Gandhi will decide it.
Just two short points here to add to this debate. One, frankly, the courts in India go into a whole range of issues they have no business going into. I wrote when this judgment came last year or year before last. Last July. And frankly, I'm not sure the judiciary is within its rights to decide what parameters can be used and cannot be used for reservations. And just one day decide that caste is not the only one, we'll throw it out. It's not the judiciary's job. It's the legislature's job. It's the executive's job. It's not the judiciary's job. I really don't think the judiciary should be deciding that, even if the judiciary has its heart in the right place on this issue. Second, when it comes to the Jat agitation in Haryana earlier this year on reservations, what was interesting was a number, there's anecdotal evidence, I traveled to Haryana and also newspaper reports. What is interesting is a lot of people didn't talk so much about jobs as admissions to colleges, especially medical colleges and engineering colleges for sons and frankly for daughters. And they said these are very difficult to get by because someone under a reserved category gets in with whatever X percentage marks, and my child or my daughter or my son doesn't get in with Y percentage marks. I actually see this as progress because you're not looking for just a government job, you're actually looking for a professional degree. So perhaps when the long-promised increment in delta, in capacity of higher education comes about, as Pratap has been alluding, perhaps when that actually happens, some of these issues can be, if not resolved, ironed out to some degree.
You know, I'm very pleased that you asked this question, and I have three very straightforward, simple points to make. First, what we have, and what Pratap was absolutely right when he talked about affirmative action. Every society needs, and India needs affirmative action more than anybody else. But affirmative action is very different than reservations. We should not confuse the two issues. Second, the Supreme Court is really largely responsible for this, and our Constitution is largely responsible for the debacle that we have. The Constitution is a half-pregnant Constitution on the subject. So therefore, where they get the fifth of the Supreme Court is half-pregnant, where do they get the 50% from? I do not know any notion of human rights or of helping the poor or helping the downtrodden which says that you should cut it off at 50%. Third, the one group, the Constitution has both economic criteria, and then it says nothing that has been said above shall overrule the state from doing for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. They do have economic criteria. I think that's the way we should go. And if you do go that path, there's one sector of India, talk about intolerance, talk about, if you will, progress, there's one sector of society that will benefit the most from economic criteria, and that's the Muslims. And that's what we need. Last, there's only one political party in India, only one, that has asked for an economic basis for reservations, for affirmative action, and that's the RSS.
It's not also known as ISIS. It's not a political party.
Sorry.
I'm afraid I can see hands going up, but I've also seen a huge big sign in bright red which says time's up. I'm happy to continue if you want, Mr. Pillai, but I'm happy also to abide by the instruction I've been given. Okay, many thanks indeed. We have time for 3 questions. The gentleman over there in the black. Yes, sir, with your hand up.
Thank you. My name is Nihit Goyal. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Prime Minister Nehru had apparently once said that one of his biggest regrets was his failure to reform the Indian administrative services. How would the panel judge Mr. Modi's efforts in that regard? Thank you.
Well, we only have one civil servant with us, a former civil servant. This has to be for you. How would the panel judge Mr. Modi's efforts in this regard, such as they've been, I will add?
In reforming the IAS, I've not seen any.
So that's why I added such as they've been.
Reforming the civil service. Well, you created the civil service over the last 70 years and you want to reform it in the last 2 years. Delta, again.
You're being a little unfair to him. His question wasn't, can you reform it in 2 years, and he wasn't questioning whether Mr. Modi had failed and criticizing him. Let's be fair to him. He was simply asking you, has Mr. Modi made efforts to reform the civil service? The first sentiment to reform it was expressed by Jawaharlal Nehru, and I assume he's also saying that Jawaharlal Nehru did zero, and he's asking whether Mr. Modi has done anything at all.
Well, Mr. Modi, he has commenced on the process of professionalizing the civil service. Whether it needs reform or otherwise, I'm leaving that issue aside. On professionalizing the civil service, because he wants the officers to be trained in certain sectors where they can be utilized far more productively. I think that's a good thing.
I think this is an issue on which a contrary opinion from the opposition Congress would be necessary so that you have the factual truth. Has Mr. Modi begun a process of professionalizing the civil service, or has he continued the tradition established by your inestimable former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi of centralizing all the powers of the civil service in her own office? Because one of the things that he does similar to her is that he insists that the PMO controls everything, thus emasculating the different other departments. So, more like Indra or more like what Vinod Rai?
Don't frame the question in this extremely unconstructive manner. It is very clear that all these canards and our anchors are all secretly hankering for Rajya Sabha nominations of the Congress Party. Clearly not true in this case, after what he's been saying all evening. But no, very simply, I've not seen many efforts to reform the administrative service. Mr. Modi issued a series of commandments. I've written an essay about them, and 19 of them, the principles under which he wants the administration to be run. If you'd like to read the essay, you can get it off ndtv.com or read the appropriate chapter of my book, India Shastra, which came out last year, which contains it. But very briefly, on Karan's subsidiary point, yes, there is a lot of centralization in the Prime Minister's office, and that is not really about reform of the civil service, because other civil servants are the ones who complain about it, since they find that the autonomy that they used to enjoy under UPA has gone, and that their files have to be sent to the PMO for every key decision, where they languish because the number of files arriving on the desk of the beleaguered civil servants outstrips the poor individual's time available to clear them. So even routine decisions, this government has an extraordinary record of leaving governmental vacancies, for example, a number of positions, simply because it takes so long to process a routine decision because of the sheer degree of centralization. But I would concede that was Karan's question, not yours.
Yes, of course, go ahead.
I think there's a larger issue we have to relate to here. Since 1991, since India's economic reforms, India has changed, Indian institutions have changed, Indian business has changed, Indian aspirations have changed. The one public institution that has changed most slowly is frankly the government. One of the expectations of Mr. Modi's being mandate in 2014 was that he would shake up the delivery system, that he would bring in private sector talent where feasible in big numbers, significant numbers to the government. There, I'm afraid, there has been some disappointment. In the foreign service, there has been some sort of new energy
has led that route.
Well, perhaps some sort of new energy. They have opened up the top jobs. Younger people are becoming ambassadors. An informal fast-track system has been created in the foreign service, which is
mid-career recruitment of outsiders, including all the private sector, into the box.
In the domestic civil service, this has been much more difficult. And frankly, I don't think enough has been attempted. This notion that if a good IAS officer is not found for a particular job, we could open it up to, let's say, an IPS officer, or a police officer, or a customs officer. doesn't really work because, it's the same talent pool you're really reaching out to, and you're not addressing the fundamental question that the differential between the talent pool available to the government today, especially in the recruitment levels, and the talent pool available, the best talent pool available to private sector is very, very sharp. It's perhaps sharper now than ever before in our history. And I don't think that realization has come, or perhaps it has not been acted upon in a manner that is required.
The gentleman in the white shirt and glasses over there, yes, yes, sir. No, to your right actually, sir. It's the gentleman to your right, yeah.
Hi, my name is Rana. I'm an investor. So this question is on the economy, as you would predict. Now, we were discussing that why private investment not picking up. The way at least we see it is the fiscal deficit too high, net financial savings too low, so not much money left also for the private sector. Fiscal deficit cutting down takes time, financial savings from the household goes up takes time. One of the easy hanging fruits or low hanging fruits could have been privatization of state-owned enterprises. We have not seen much in that front. So my question is that, do you see Mr. Modi taking some political risk in taking on unions like Air India and going to privatize? And Air India, I'm just naming one loss-making SOE. There are several of them.
Surjit, I suspect that question wants an answer from you, but answer the question.
So what was the question? No. Yeah, okay. Look, Volvo was a company owned by the Swedish government. It was then sold at a profit to somebody who sold it to Ford and so on and so forth. I think ownership is the most irrelevant of issues on economic matters. It is the economic environment that the managers face, and are they able to operate in a professional manner? Now, what is correct that in India, nobody trusts, including me, I don't trust, the government to do anything right. But I think what we should be getting at is what was the discussion earlier, is the environment for economic performance improving? While on that score, since we're talking about economic performance and it keeps coming up, not to end with the data point, but the labor industry's data accounts for 10% of the jobs in the country. So while Shashi, you were quoting all of that, maybe those people went into the services sector. This survey.
But Surjit, in contending with Shashi, you're actually being discourteous to the young man who asked a question, because he wants to know whether disinvestment is desirable and possible. You're suggesting, and I'm just clarifying, that in fact it's not necessary.
Yes. But I think improving the economic climate is much more important for Indian industry.
Ashok.
Two things. One, he's talking about privatization, not disinvestment. That was the question, right? In two successive budgets, this government has spoken about strategic disinvestment, which is a code for privatization. It's done precious little. So that is a very legitimate question you're asking. And I disagree with Surjit. I think some privatization is necessary. Air India, certainly. There is no way Air India can be rescued. Reforming Air India is like reforming the Indian government. It's impossible to do. Would you
advocate privatization
of Air India? Absolutely, tomorrow morning. Okay. But let me point out two things. One, in the Vajpayee government years, the government had an impressive privatization program, which the BJP believes, and you can't discount a politician believing that, led to it losing votes in terms of organized trade unions and public sector employees voting against it. So it's a little wary of that. Second, do remember that the economic environment today is very different from what it was at the height of the boom between 2004 and 2011. I'll give you one anecdote. Sometime in 2008 or 2009, a man called Bedi Prasad Verma was Sashi's cabinet colleague and India's steel minister. He knows nothing about steel. And some of us were having a conversation and people said, why do you need a steel minister? Why do you need Steel Authority of India to be run by the government anyway? The private sector produces so much steel. Steel is now decontrolled. Just sell off public sector steel plants. You could have that conversation in 2008, 2009, when the economy was doing well, when the commodity cycle was just turbocharged. Today, given where the commodity cycle is, given where global demand is, given where the steel industry is, you can't have that conversation. And that is the reality.
Let me say, I agree with Ashok, but just to point out that the government has actually declared targets, whether Surjit considers them irrelevant or not. In the first budget, they said they would raise 99,000 crores from disinvestment, strategic disinvestment. They actually ended up raising 29,000 from one or two small stakes in Coal India and so on. In the second budget, they came up with a much less ambitious figure, about 59, 60,000 crores. They didn't raise that. I mean, they basically ended up with 20 on again, or 19. So now the question is, in the third budget, they again have a disinvestment target. Can they reach it? Now, Ashok may be right that the climate doesn't encourage them to sell because there aren't enough buyers. But I think the problem is that if this is seen as an important source of money for the government, I don't see how the government is going to be able to do that without having a committed approach, a logical, market-friendly approach to privatization and disinvestment.
Okay, this is definitely our last question of the evening. Yes, sir, your hand has been up for a long time. Everyone in front of me in the white shirt, who's smiling as well.
Yeah, my name is Ashok. I work in the commodity sector. Two questions. One was, Mr. Vinod Rai has been Auditor-General, so does he think that these recent coal auctions, the spectrum and everything else, the way it's gone, clearly shows an improvement from the transparency, corruption and those angles?
Tell me something before he answers. Do you expect him to say no? Because he'd be contradicting the report that he presented.
No, without commenting on how bad the past was, what I'm asking is the delta. Is it any better now? And the second question to Professor Mehta, that institutions are very important to mention. I thought for a country to improve, citizenry, as in individual people being mobilized in a certain direction, is also equally important. So would you see the Jan Dhan, the giving up the gas subsidy, the Swachh Bharat, the toilets, or all these aspects that have happened, has it mobilized people at the individual level, and will that make a difference to the country's progress?
Vinod, go ahead.
The transparency issue on coal and spectrum auctions. The very fact that there have been no allegations against the auctions, the very fact that they have not been contested by a public interest litigation indicates to the fact that generally people are in agreement with the transparency aspect of the auctions the way they have been conducted. And I think they were conducted electronically, online. There was no scope for interference, and I think they were very transparent.
Pratap.
I'll link the two questions you asked. I do think we talk a lot about corruption in the state, but if you ask the question, I'm actually more worried about Indian capital than I'm worried about the Indian state. Okay? And actually the auctions are a good example of this, where I think Mr. Rai is right. On the face of it, the processes were transparent, they were mandated. The big question for India is Indian capital going to be willing to play by the rules of transparency or not? And the test for the coal auctions is not now. The test for the coal auctions is most economists think they were bought at prices that are unviable. They will have to go through some kind of either surrender or renegotiation 3 or 4 years from now. And then the test will come of who blinks first. And I suspect, in fact, one of the, things holding back the Indian economy, to be fair, not just what the problem with the state is, I think large sections of large Indian capital have still not woken up to the democratic reality that states cannot dole out discretion in the way that they used to. Now, that leads to your second point, which is actually citizenry does matter. And look, the citizens do in different ways actually express their disquiet. Let's not forget that the fact that we are having this discussion, all things had to come together. You had to have the Comptroller and Auditor-General making a case that something was wrong. You had to have a civil society mobilization and an anti-corruption movement, sending a signal to politicians that the political cost of scandals is actually going to rise, right? And then you have to have a political class that actually seizes that moment to create transformative institutional change. All three have to come together for this enduring change to happen.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there we come definitely to the end of this discussion. I see a few hands going up, but I'm really sorry we're completely out of time. My thanks to all the members of the panel for their wonderful work. In particular, I want to thank all of you for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karan Thapar and distinguished speakers. I would like to request you, all of you, to remain on stage and invite Ambassador Pillai to proceed on stage to present the token of appreciations to the chairperson and speakers. First, Mr. Karan Thapar. To Mr. Karan Thapar, the chairperson. Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Professor Pratap Bhanu Mehta. Mr. Ashok Malik. Dr. Surjit Bhalla. And Mr. Vinod Rai. I request everyone to stay on stage for a group photo, and I would like to invite the director of the ISAS, Professor Surjit Bhalla, to join them. I request the speakers, they can take their seats, and to invite Professor Mitra to say a few words. A vote of thanks to all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, after that exciting debate, it's now my privilege and joy to say a few words of thanks. And I'm sure, especially for those who are not used to Indian debates, the delectable passion and reckless abandon with which our panelists have talked would certainly be a happy memory for many of us for a long time. Remember that argumentative Indian, and especially in front of a foreign audience. Thank you all very much. You have traveled a long way, set aside important business to join us today in the age of globalization and jet-setting performers. Opera singers, tennis stars also travel. They do it for a very large fee. You have come for the sheer pleasure of enriching public debate. For that, heartfelt thanks from Chairman Pillai and the ISAS community. I would like to say a couple of words, by the way of some closing remarks, on the significance of this event. The chairman has already told you at the outset why ISAS organizes events like this. ISAS is a think tank supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and all of it comes from the tax money. So what is the equation between tax money and valuable time that the audience has given and the panelists have given to an event like this? I have got two answers for you to think about. First of all, India and Singapore are both democracies, and democracies are about public debate, about public issues. And I think democracies ought to celebrate one another. So this event has been a celebration of 2 years of the Modi government and a critical analysis of the scorecards. Democracies ought to learn from one another. I hope the audience has learned what makes India work, and perhaps this knowledge will flow in both directions. And it's not just about democracy, it's also about business. After all, Singapore is connected to India, so is India worth investing? Is India worth a long prospect in terms of a continuous relationship? There is something to think about. As you have seen from the panelists, We have talked about everything from toilets to temples to taxes to terrorism. I can go on. And in spite of the extra time the chairman gave, we have not had the decisive goal, so the debate is still open. I think it is continuous, rich debate. It's what keeps democracies going. That should be one of the takeaways from this evening. My last point is what shall we remember this evening with? At the last moment when we were trying to decide what to call this event, the staff came to ask me, should we call it Modi's India or India under Modi? I chose India under Modi, and I think in 2 years we have learned that the scores have been reversed. It's not India under Modi, but Modi under India. In 2 years, Modi has learned to live with India, and India has learned to live with Modi. I think that's one of the biggest achievements of this government. Ladies and gentlemen, we have talked a lot about what has happened. Let's also talk a little about what has not happened. There has not been a bloodbath, neither at the frontiers nor bloodbath in terms of vicious riots between Hindus and Muslims. There have been hot words, but there has not been any bloodbath. Order has been maintained, and that's a great achievement for a country which has seen the opposite often. Now, what has Modi contributed? Particularly, outsiders like me who come to Singapore are amazed by two things, by the great malls and great food courts. So if you think of Indian politics as a big marketplace or a large table with lots of different kinds of dishes, I would say the Modi regime has opened one more shop and added one more dish to this sumptuous meal. I'm very grateful that that extra shop is there and that extra dish is there. I'm equally grateful that that shop or that dish is not the only one to choose from. Ladies and gentlemen, Indian democracy lives, and I'm happy to join it. Thank you very much. I'll now hand you back to the MC to
Thank you, Professor Mitra. We've now come to the end of the ISAS panel discussion. We thank you for your participation and hope to see you in future ISAS events. Have a good evening. Thank you.